Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. The things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded on March 13th, 2017. This is podcast number 3, called I Just Want to Be Normal. Now, last podcast you got a chance to hear my daughter's story about her OCD. This podcast, I want to talk about this idea of normal. You know, I work with a lot of different clients, and one of the biggest phrases I get when I first sit down with them is the feeling that they want to be normal again. They want to have a normal life. They want to get out of the chaos, want to get out of the stress, and just live a normal life. And I found that myself in the life that we lead here at my house. There are so many times that I've had that feeling because it gets so overwhelming at times that you just want to go back to some other time, some other place that was pleasant for you. And so what I found is normal is one of these things that people are shooting for that I feel is one of the biggest parts of conflict in their mind. I wanted to read what the definition of normal is coming out of the, I don't want to even say the dictionary anymore because I don't think anybody follows a book dictionary, but I think I actually found this on the web. Where else would you find it? And this is the definitions that they have in the dictionary, whatever. As an adjective, conforming to a standard, usual, typical, expected. The words they use are usual, standard, ordinary, customary, conventional, habitual, accustomed, and expected. As a noun, it's the usual, average, or typical state or condition. What I like the words I like out of that, one of the words I like out of that is expected. And so we have some picture in our mind of what normal is supposed to be. But I would say most times it's a blurry picture, or if it's a half-weighted picture. I feel like there's a difference between belief and reality. And there's a couple portions to that. In the belief side of it, what we're believing it to be is got a mixture of things. Probably a lot of what we believe about normal comes from our own childhood, our own raising, what was normal at the time when we were raised. For me, that was like the late 50s, early 60s. I was born in the late 50s. So the 60s became kind of a standard normal for me in some way, shape, or form for a long time. I think that's faded for me, but I think a lot of us find ourselves in a place of believing whatever we were taught or whatever came about. And again, I bring up this wonderful idea of the sponge years. It's that time from, well, different people have different beliefs about what I call the sponge years. Some say it's about 0 to 3. Some say it goes as much as 5. I really truly believe sponge years goes from birth to almost in your 20s. And what happens is that sponge gets drier and gets smaller as you get older. But so our beliefs sometimes, I think, come from a time when we were in those sponge years, when we were taking in the environment. That environment became the comfort, and so it kind of gets us set in a belief that that is the norm. Because even those that are abused or those that have mental issues or whatever believe, that what they are doing or what they believe is right, even though to everybody else it could look wrong. So we tend to set our beliefs about what norm is by what we also see around us, what our environment is like, even to the present time. When we look at neighbors who are doing things that we aren't, we look at others at work, wherever, that are achieving things we're not achieving, or they're living a life that somehow seems different and better than what we are in ourselves. And so we set that as our norm, but that's setting our life to someone else's life. That's setting our path to someone else's path. That's not being ourselves. When in reality, I believe everybody's norm is their own beliefs within themselves. What truly makes them comfortable within themselves. Now, of course, we have, norms, I guess you would say, out there, are part of our belief system, that are kind of set as rules to help us in being conforming, or let's say cooperating with others, finding common ground so that we can all live together without trouble. Because, for instance, the norm body temperature, I believe, is 98.6. We have I always like to look at, we're all human beings. That's kind of a norm in a way. That one of us, or all of us, aren't all, Martians. We aren't of another breed except human. So we have that as a common norm. But going almost beyond that gets a little bit tricky. I mean, we all have the same organs in our bodies. They may not all be functioning at the same levels or quality as others. We also have laws like stopping for a red light or a stop sign, or certain things that are against the law that are kind of norms for us to follow. But I always get a kick out of somebody that says, well, I just want to get back to the day, back in time, or back in the day when things were better. And I think about that, taking us back to the values we had at some point. Well, where would that point be? What would be the perfect norm? Would it be the 50s when, we did things then that would not be acceptable now, that were not good now, that didn't change that necessarily. It was a somewhat prosperous time for us. Or do we go further back to that? Do we go back into the 1800s and find some norm time then that is perfect for everybody? Because I believe that each era, each part of our time, was a time that probably fit for some. I sometimes feel like I want to go back to the 40s because I love big band music. But the 40s, we had the ending time of a war, which was not a fun place, I'm sure, to be in. Had rationing going on. That's why the 50s look so good, because it was a recovery, even though at that point we still had a war going on. In the 60s we had a war going on. And then as we got into, I guess it was the 80s and 90s when we start going into like the Gulf War and things like that. So what would be the perfect time to be a normal time, or a time of better values for us? I think they are shaping into things that aren't the best values for us at this present time. But I think the principle behind this is to stop the comparison. Stop comparing ourselves to others. Because their norm may have parts of it that fit to us, but their norm is theirs. And their norm is what's going on in their head, which we don't know. That's one of the toughest parts about comparing to others, is that we have no idea what's going on in their head, what's going on behind those closed doors. The whole idea of the invisible wheelchair. We look at this family who could be putting on just a big facade based on having to cover what's going on in that house, what's covering what's going on in their brains at that moment, the mind, the emotions. We have no idea, but yet we want to compare ourselves to that, which could be comparing to a complete facade that has no strength, that has no foundation. And so we're transferring power over to somebody else. And I'm going to talk more about the comparing ourselves in the next podcast. But for now, the point that I want to get across is that the norm, as we may want to look at it, really has more to do about what fits as the norm for you. What would feel normal? How does that compare to your own personal characteristics, your own personal feelings? So, when people come in to work with me, they want the norm. And what I try to get them to understand, it's not about the norm that's out there. It's about the norm that's inside of themselves. And get them back, back to a place of understanding their energy, their spirit, who they are. Because you know what? We can't change anybody else. And I would imagine, and I can really see it from my own life, if we commit ourselves to somebody else's norm, at some point they're going to take a turn down their path that's going to feel uncomfortable to us. Because I don't believe anybody can be the exact norm that we are, that can be the exact person that we are. And so we can travel down the road with them and follow their norms and their characteristics. But somewhere along the line, as you get older, as you change yourself, that person's going to go down a road to the left and you really want to go to the right. And I don't say that as a political thing. I'm just talking about they're going to go down some path that isn't going to feel as comfortable for you. And at that point, you're going to have to break away from them. And that could be painful. Versus following your own things. Not that you can't see others for example. Not that you can't see others that fit a certain thing that you like, but that you have to take it in and fit it for you. So understand that you are the normal. You are the one that commits to normal. And that it takes your internal being, your internal spirit, to develop the normal that fits for you. And it doesn't have to fit for anybody else. It probably does need to fit the norm of some basic standards that we've set, like following some of the laws, because you don't really want to spend, you have choices, of course, to do these things, but you also know that those come with consequences. So if you decide not to follow the law or the norm of that part of the law, then you could find your consequences of being in jail. So just to reiterate, it's really about the internal norm of you, the internal spirit of you, what that looks like and how that is shaped, and follow that path. This concludes this podcast. Please remember to leave comments for me, because that really helps me to understand what you're looking for and helps give me fodder for the next possible podcast. Also, I'd love to hear your invisible wheelchair story if you're willing to share it. If you are, feel free to go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. Now, if you've heard these things and you feel like you need further assistance or some help in what you're going through, and you want to spend some time with me working through those issues, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or simply call me at 704-562-1630. Finally, don't forget there is a tap-in recording following this podcast you may want to take advantage of. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life into new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.